You're listening to Boobies and Noobies, brought to you by the Frolic Podcast Network. Welcome to Boobies and Noobies, the podcast that asks novice romance readers to think outside the dick in a box and brave the unbridled world of erotica. I'm your host, Kelly Reynolds, and today is our first book review for the month of June. And as you probably already know by now, June is all about one of my favorite times of the year, one that I hope to get back out to soon, and that's wedding season. So joining me today is founder and editor of Words and Kisses, an online bookshop for romance readers. Please join me in welcoming Amy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited. I'm also a big fan of wedding season, so.
Oh my gosh, you and me both. What's your favorite thing about weddings, Amy?
Oh, what's my favorite things? Well, I am unsurprisingly a massive romantic, so I do actually really like the ceremony. Always have a little cry, even when I've gone to weddings where I'm like the plus one, so I don't really know them very well. You know, that bit where they're, saying their vows and all that, it does always bring a tear to the eye. But I also love the dancing.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Now you're speaking my language. I love that though. You're right. It's so funny, like how much I love romance. I don't consider myself to be like a romantic person in general. Like maybe it's just because I've read so many of these books and like there's just certain gestures that like if people do them in real life, I feel a little jaded. I'm just like, what do you mean you sprinkled rose petals all over the house? Like who's going to have to clean that up later? Like that's an inconvenience. But I do love weddings. I'm with you, and I will tear up the dance floor at a wedding.
I feel like it's a really good place to dance because you're in like a contained place with people that you know. It's not like a bar where like there's not enough space and like you can't get to the bar to get drinks or whatever.
Right.
And you get a lot more like dance floor space. They play like more cheesy music than I feel like they do. That's just me revealing my age. When you go out, it's always a bit like, I've not heard of this song. I don't know what.
Oh, I'm with you. Whereas you're right, like on the dance floor at a wedding, it's like the best hits of like the 60s, 70s, 80s. Like they hit all the different generations because like normally you have parents and grandparents and kids. Like I love that. I love, getting down to like, my parents' generation of music, but also like Baby Shark or whatever.
Yeah. One of my bridesmaids accidentally gave someone a black eye at our wedding when Frozen came on. So the Let It Go, was very effusive with her, like, you can imagine opening her arms, like, let it go, and just clocked one of her very good friends.
And then you throw in some alcohol too, like that plays a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, completely agree.
I love it. Is there a particular song that, like, if they play it at weddings or just anywhere, you're like, this is my jam. This is the song that I have to dance to.
Oh, I don't know whether this is one that you guys will recognize because obviously probably most people will be American, but the one that always gets me at weddings, my husband is from Sheffield, which is a part of the north of England. Arctic Monkeys are from there. I feel like I don't know how international they are or whether they're just very
I know who Arctic Monkeys is, but I probably won't know songs by them.
And that's they have me. They have a song called I Bet That You Look Good on the Dance Floor. But because it's the north, they say, I bet that you look good on the dance floor. So you have to sing it. I have to sing it in an accent because that's not how I usually talk. But because they're all from Sheffield, they're always like, they're the best band ever. Like as soon as that song comes on, everyone wants to get on, and have a go at it. So yeah, that's always the one that's a bit like nostalgic for me for weddings.
I feel like the next time I hear that song, I'm going to hear it in dance floor.
Yeah, like, you have to say it like cause, they just have he has a really strong Sheffield like Yorkshire accent. All their songs are the same, and I remember because they were quite big when I was a teenager, and I lived in the South, and so everyone speaks like this with R, like dance floor, but you'd get a bunch of like essentially like 15, 16-year-old girls all putting on Sheffield accents when
I
those songs came on.
love that. Oh my gosh. And you know what's so funny is like, I'm obviously not from the UK, if you can tell, but no, I always think about, how we have so many different accents and
Yeah,
dialects and regions like here in the United States, and it doesn't really occur to me like that that's something that, is experienced in other countries as well. Like for me, I hear like UK, I'm like, "Oh, okay." So like they have like a British accent. Like but
yeah.
that's just like one
The one,
thing to me. Like I don't think about the different regions, whereas you're talking about like, oh well, we like make fun of the northerners by
yeah,
saying like dance. And that's so funny to me. And I really do want to visit the UK. That's like top of my list of places to go. But we gotta get out of this
yeah.
thing of in our world first. But once we do that, travel and weddings are back on the
Yes,
table.
absolutely. Yeah, I know that a lot have been sort of rescheduled for later this year, so I'm hoping that they'll actually
Yes.
happen.
Me too. Me too. Well, Amy, let's talk about romance. I mean, we're already there with our wedding talk, and today's book is going to, blend both romance and wedding talk into one. But I'd love to know just sort of like one, how your romance reading journey began, and two, how that led you to open up your own online bookshop basically dedicated to the genre.
Yeah, so I feel like it's a kind of tale as old as time for a lot of us, but I did loved reading as a kid and read sort of probably when I was a teenager, read a lot of kind of like romance adjacent, what I would now probably consider like
Mm,
women. I hate the term women's fiction, but I feel like it's
I
the
know,
best
me too.
descriptor of what it is. So it's like there were romantic storylines, but it wasn't the main plot. A lot of like Devil Wears Prada style. It was like the time where all the books had shoes on the cover, like Bridget Jones, that kind of
Yes.
stuff.
You're
Love
right, there was, like, a period of time with a lot of shoes on covers, now that I think about it.
shoes and legs, a lot of women's legs. I don't really see that so much anymore. I don't think.
Maybe it'll make a comeback after we've, like, gone through the illustrated covers. Maybe up next is, like, object covers, and we're just gonna start recycling, like, the shoes and stuff again.
Yes. Yeah, so loved that as a teenager, and read as much as I could get my hands on, and then went to uni to do English, and that is not the kind of book that they let you study when you do English at uni. There's a lot of books by old white guys for the most part,
Mm,
and even when it's not, like, it doesn't often work out well for women in like classic literature, generally speaking.
mm.
So just not that fun, not all that fun. And like, I didn't hate all those books, don't get me wrong. Like, there were some that I enjoyed, some obviously that I didn't. But it just absolutely killed my love of reading pretty much. Like,
Right.
finished my degree. I did a master's degree as well, which was in gender studies. And then after that, I was like, I don't want to read anything, thank you. Which like made me feel really sad, because like it had always been like my absolute favorite thing to do. So in 2015, my like goal for the year was to read 100 books. So I bought a Kindle and I started reading, and at the time I just read sort of like a bit chaotically. Like, I'd read The Hunger Games, I remember, at the beginning of the year, and then some like classics that were free on Kindle, and just like picked up whatever I sort of could. And obviously 100 books is quite a lot of books.
Yeah.
So I started running out of like ideas of like what to read, and so I started listening to some book podcasts, and I was listening to the Book Riot podcast. I don't know if you ever listened to any of
I
theirs.
do. I love, like, the listicles that Book Riot puts
Yes,
together too,
yeah,
like,
they do
great
really,
resource.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, they're doing really good work, and a couple of their podcasts, and they raved about Sarah MacLean, as they should. But at the time, that meant nothing to me. But they just like would always mention about how great her books were. I was like, well, there's got to be something in it. I'll read one of her books. So I picked it up like secondhand on Amazon, and it was A Rogue of One's Own, which is not her second series, the first of her second series. And I read it, and in the first chapter, like, essentially, this isn't a spoiler because it happens very early on, like, he's going down on her, he's kidnapped her, like, all this like drama's happening. I was like, you can have this in books, like, this is allowed. Like, it can be really fun and like sexy. Why did no one tell me? And there's
You
basically
just
that was
weren't
just like a
hanging
bit,
out. You weren't
yeah.
hanging out with the right people.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So that just like absolutely flipped a switch and was like, oh, and then I just like read more of her books, and then again used Book Riot as a bit of a like resource to like find some other books that were similar. So like Courtney Milan, Tessa Dare, like more historical to start with. And just yeah, kind of went from there and went from reading like a few romance books scattered in with the other books I was reading to almost essentially reading romance books exclusively.
I love it.
And then was just like kind of listening to more like romance podcasts as well, Boobs and Newbies and Bosoms and Wicked Wallflowers and like all those kinds of things, and like being part of like Facebook groups and stuff. And there were so many like romance subscription services and things like that,
Yeah.
and there were just, I couldn't find at the time anything like that in the UK, and I was really jealous of it and I wanted it. And there's that kind of age-old internet rule kind of thing of, if it doesn't exist, you have to make it. And
Amen.
yeah, and if you, and chances are if I was looking for that, but there's got to be someone else who would look for that as well. So yeah, and my husband will tell you I could never sit still and just like let things be. I always have to have a project of some kind on the go.
I knew we would get along great, Amy. Yeah, I'm very much similar in that way as well. Like I feel like if I have a lazy day, I know it's not the right thing to do, but I know that I feel guilty because I'm
Oh
like
yeah,
I need to be doing something. Like and I like being busy. Like I know that
no,
doesn't work for everybody, but I personally like being busy.
I do as well. And I really found like, so my job is relatively creative. I work in marketing, so there's like a creative element of it.
Oh, nice.
But after, particularly after my son was born, I just felt like I really needed like more than that.
Mhm.
And just felt like this was kind of a way to like share my love of these books. And like, you know, what's been really lovely about it is the kind of community element, which I should have expected but kind of didn't, that's actually come around it. You know, people
Yeah.
are making recommendations, like making pals in the sort of romance world. So basically it's just an excuse to talk about romance books as much as I can. And
I didn't realize that Words and Kisses had started like exclusively as a subscription box. Like, cause I know that I've been following you on Instagram for the longest time. And I'm sure I saw like the early stages of it as a box, but I've just always thought of Words and Kisses as, oh, there's subscription boxes. You can get blind dates with the book. You can, just order books. And I've bought I think it was last year, and you probably did them this year too, where there was like little Mother's Day
yeah,
gift packages. And I remember I bought two because I got one for my mom and then I bought one for myself very selfishly. But no, I love that, you've provided something that yes, we have other, subscription box options and bookstores in the world, but I don't know of any others that cater specifically to the that are in the UK I'm sure the majority of like your clients and shoppers are probably UK based or like overseas, right?
yeah. So mostly UK, a handful in Europe, although Brexit
Yeah.
made that more difficult.
Ugh.
Now we have to, you have to pay like import taxes and stuff, which you didn't have to pay before and stuff like that. But yeah, so a few in Europe where obviously it's harder to get hold of like English language romance books.
Mm.
But yeah, for the most part, yeah, it's UK. I have kind of spotted a few doing similar-ish things, but with different twists on it. So I don't, I don't want to be like it's the only one because I'm sure that's not the case.
Oh, right, right,
But
right.
yeah,
You found a niche in the market that was like missing, and so you wanted to, like you said, supply books to other readers like yourself,
yeah,
in a part
absolutely.
of the world that weren't necessarily getting them. So mission accomplished.
Yeah, well, I like to think so.
What would you say, Amy? Is there a romance that you would recommend to a newbie romance reader, seeing as this is boobies and newbies?
Yeah.
What book do you have in the Words and Kisses store right now that would be like the one you would recommend to a newbie romance reader?
A newbie. I feel like I recommend Talia Hibbert all the time on everything.
Oh,
I'm
yes.
a bit biased because obviously we've worked together on some sort of side book things, but I genuinely am a huge fan of hers, and I think that for someone who is new to the genre, her books are perfect because they're very funny, they're very like light and easy, and I say that as a compliment, you know. Absolutely. Her new like Brown Sisters trilogy, I think, is like the perfect introduction to romance. And what I like about it is that it's very British, and
Yes.
there's a kind of, there is, I think, a separation between like British romance and American romance. Like British romance, it tends to be more on the women's fiction side of things. You tend to get it, you know, it tends to be a little bit different. Apart from in like Mills and Boone, which I guess is your Harlequin. You guys have Harlequin, and we have Mills
Yes.
and Boone. I think they might be owned by the same company, but they're just branded differently. Which is the kind of like, you know, the Shakes secret baby, like those sorts of romances. But then the sort of, I guess, what I would consider mainstream British romance is a lot, you know, not as much sex on the page for a start. Often they'll have like 2 or 3 like main female characters in the book rather than just like one central couple. Whereas I feel like Talia writes what I would consider to be more like American style romance, but it is very British. And when you read it, like if you're a UK like listener, you can pick up on that so well. And I think I always just really enjoy it, like the phrasing of things, like the swear words that she uses.
Yes. Actually, that's the perfect way to describe it. Like I didn't even think about the differences between like a British romance and an American romance, but now that you're mentioning it, I am thinking back on the romances we have reviewed for the podcast written by UK authors, and I think you're right. I think they're definitely, at least the ones that are standing out to me, are ones where they were on the for lack of a better word, cleaner side
Yeah,
of romance. Ugh,
yeah,
yuck. I need a better word to
yeah,
describe that. But you're right with Talia, you know, she does write very sexy books, but and they're very funny, very sexy, super inclusive. I mean, that's oh God. I mean, the award for diversity goes to right there. But that series is a great one to recommend. I wholeheartedly stand behind that
yeah.
recommendation.
I mean, I feel like it's a very obvious one because, you know, everyone in romance is probably like, yeah, of course, we love Talia Hibbert, she's
Yeah.
fantastic. But that's like one of my colleagues at work, actually, because obviously they know what I do, and was like, oh, well, where should I start? And I'm like, oh, what's the best book? And I was like, well, that's such a subjective. Like, I think they're all great, but that's
I
more that I
know.
gave him. So I was like, okay, if I have to pick, I feel like this is a good introduction. And but it's also not too far down the like steamy side of things that makes it like inappropriate for me to recommend it to a colleague.
Yes. Well, and you mentioned some great historical
Yeah,
romance writers earlier, you know, between Sarah McLean and Courtney Milan, Tessa Dare, like those. And it's so funny. I did a recent Instagram live with Jessica Peterson, and I think that those 3 were the same 3 authors that she mentioned as well as being like her introduction to historical romance
yeah,
and falling in love with it. So it's so funny that happened, but I can totally see because I think of the 3 of them as writing oh, and Joanna Shoup too. She's on
yeah,
my list. I think of them as writing like what I consider more of like the modern historical romance, in that you get a lot more contemporary feminist like characters in a historical setting. So like those are the ones that I want to go to when I think of a historical romance, as opposed to picking up one from like say 20 years ago, when, you know, it was a different time, it was a different world. We maybe weren't as conscious about certain things that we were putting into our books as we are now. So I
yeah.
think those are all great recommendations as well.
No, I totally agree. I definitely see what you mean in terms of that modern, and I just think they're all doing something really different. Like I think people
Yes.
have this. I mean, wrongly or rightly, I think people have an idea. If you were like, oh yeah, historical romance, like a Regency romance, people would have a view in their head of what that meant. But I don't
Yeah.
think the 3 of them are actually doing what that stereotypical
Yeah.
version of it is at all. Like they're doing something really different with it.
I think that's right. Well, and especially now that we have Bridgerton in the Netflix form. I mean, obviously the series has been around for a couple decades, but now that I think is going to be something that ushers in a new amount of readers, which is great. But also, I hope people do go beyond just Bridgerton. Like, it's sort of like when 50 Shades of Grey came out and that ushered in a whole group of readers. That's fantastic. I'm so thankful for series and movies doing that. However, I hope people also take that as an opportunity to expand what they are reading and look beyond 50 Shades of Grey and Bridgerton, because there are so many authors out there, like the ones we're talking about, who are doing incredible things for the genre with their books. So, yeah, all you have to do is pick one up and you'll realize it.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And I think, 50 Shades of Grey in itself could become, people think of it as like cliche now.
Mhm.
But yeah, you can't underestimate how many people picked up romance or even picked up a book for the first time in a long time.
Exactly.
It's not to be sniffed at.
Yes, I agree. Well, okay. Where can everybody find Words and Kisses, Amy?
They can find it at wordsandkisses.com, luckily.
Oh, so easy.
I know. But I'm also on Instagram at Words and Kisses Club, and on Twitter, words_kisses, because someone had Words and Kisses, and also Words and Kisses Club was too long
Oh.
for Twitter. So they really, But yeah, so those are sort of the main places. Instagram is my favorite, I think, out of
Yeah.
all of them.
Well, and it's such a visual medium, and you post like super cute pictures and graphics. And so it's the one, like, I love Twitter because I'm a writer, and so I love, like, packing a punch with a certain amount of characters if you can. But I love Instagram because I'm also a visual learner. So seeing pictures and, people's photos of them in the world, like, it's so exciting to me. But yeah, okay, well, everybody go shop Words and Kisses, and they've got all sorts of stuff for you to enjoy. But for now, let's take it back to wedding season and talk about today's book, which is With This Cake by Samantha Chase. Y'all thought I was done with yummy love, didn't you? May was all about yummy love, and here we are talking about cake. But this time, weddings are involved. So this contemporary romance was published just last month, May 2021. It's available on Amazon for $4.99 Kindle edition. And it is the second book in Samantha Chase's Meet Me at the Altar series. However, you can definitely read each book as a standalone. I know I started with this book and not the first book, and you get a very clear idea of what you've missed very early on in this book. And it's just that our heroine runs a company with her two best friends, and one of the friends got married. So I'm going to take a wild guess that the first book is about her romance, and that the third book, which doesn't have a release date yet, although it does say on Goodreads that it is expected in 2021, that one's going to be about Josie, the third friend, and they all work together at their company, Meet Me at the Altar, which is, I have to say, a cute name for a company. I do like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I picked up on that as well in terms of, was it Sky's her other friend?
Yes, yeah, Sky and Josie.
Yeah, no, and it sounds a cute place to work. Like, they've also got like there seems to be other people there, so I wonder whether it would extend further out of the three of them, because she mentioned Emily, her like assistant, quite a lot as well. So she didn't feature a lot, but I wondered whether she might take a book as well, potentially.
That's true. That's a good point. I could see one, because she did pop up a couple times, so I could see where Emily might have a book. And who knows? Just keep adding in more staff members; it'll be fine. So let me go ahead and give everyone the synopsis, and then we will dive into our review. So this is, again, With This Cake by Samantha Chase. Cheery Baker dreams of finding Mr. Right. When your last name is Baker, it's really only a matter of time before it also becomes your job title. Some might see it as a self-fulfilling prophecy, but for Leanna, being the go-to baker for Meet Me at the Altar is a dream come true. There's nothing she loves more than to create the perfect desserts to help couples celebrate their big days. But despite what they say about the way to a man's heart being through his stomach, Leanna has yet to lure her perfect man with her sweet treats. uptight workaholic dreams of being left alone. If Brody King is going to take time off, he would much rather it be to train for his triathlon, which by the way, I totally forgot about while the book was going on. Like it's
Yeah.
mentioned in the beginning that he's training for a triathlon, and then we like never see him like training ever again. And not his brother's engagement party. It would be one thing if it was just a regular party, but no, his brother and his bride-to-be had to go over the top and plan a full week of family togetherness and ridiculous wedding games. There's no way he's going to survive it. When Brody crashes into Leanna and 100 cupcakes are ruined, he does the only thing he can. He offers to help her make more. All it takes is a here we go with the food. All it takes is a few cups of sugar and a dash of vanilla before Brody is craving not just Leanna's sweet treats, but the baker herself. Ooh, okay. Again, this seemed like a perfect transition from our month of yummy love into wedding season. There is a lot of baked goods porn. So prepare yourselves if you're hungry, if you're craving a sweet treat, have a cupcake or cookie on hand because let me tell you, I got groceries yesterday after finishing this book and I had to buy pre-packaged cookie dough.
It is. It's a lot of cake. She makes a lot of cake, and obviously in the synopsis it says about how much she absolutely loves it. But she's like baking on her downtime at the weekend.
Yes.
Actually, in the
Oh my
evening.
God. It's like an outrageous amount. Like at one point, he invites her to spend the weekend at his place. And she says that, like, while she's staying the weekend, and mind you, this is 2 days, we're talking about a Saturday and a Sunday. She says that she bakes, like, oh, I baked 2 sheet cakes. I baked 2 dozen blueberry muffins and 2 dozen chocolate muffins and only like a dozen or so cupcakes and some banana bread. I'm just like, bitch, you made all this in one weekend? Are you kidding me?
Even if you're a professional baker, that's got to take up a big chunk of time.
Like, clearly, the two of them didn't spend any time together that weekend because all she was doing was baking.
You say that, but then he says they had sex with everyone in the house. So when
That
was this happening?
That is a busy, sweaty, dirty, flour-covered weekend. Like
Yeah.
that does not work for me. But you know what? Yeah, that's the thing is like Leanna is like quite the accomplished baker. Like they make no secret of the fact that like she's like the best at what she does, which I really appreciated. I love that she's so good at her job. She's a great baker. She's a good friend. She's a good businesswoman. It seems like their business is doing really well,
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
I liked that a lot about her. But yeah, the fact that she just wants to bake even when she's off the clock, and she's always talking about how exhausted she is. I'm like, well, then sit down,
Yeah, absolutely. You're like, I mean, maybe if you are really into baking, like I like to bake as like a hobby, but I can't imagine if I did it all day every day, I'd then want to pick
right?
back up again, like straight away afterwards. But
It's a lot. So, okay, I will turn it over to you to start with and just say, what were some of the things that you liked about this book?
what were some of the things? See, I kind of felt like this book was a bit like a cupcake. I was trying to think of something smart to say, so I was like, it was very sweet. Like it was a very
Yes.
sweet book, and it wasn't that long, so it kind of felt like it was like quite small and contained, and like a few mouthfuls, as it were. And it had a kind of, I feel like a bit of a Hallmark movie quality to it as well.
Yes.
So if the kind of like, oh, he's a big bad executive and all he wants to do is like make deals, but then the like sweet baking lady teaches him about the real meaning, not of Christmas, but of of life.
That was the only thing missing was
Yeah,
Christmas.
it was Christmas, and like, oh no, actually, you mentioned about the triathlon, and that actually he didn't want to train for a triathlon at all. It's like, well, good, because you didn't do any training.
And of course he doesn't have a sweet tooth. Like I feel like
Yeah,
every Hallmark movie I've seen with somebody who is like the baker, the opposition is always somebody who's like, "Oh, well I don't eat cakes." And like, of course she like
yeah.
force feeds him a cupcake and he's like, "This is heaven. Where have I been?" And it's yeah, where have you been? Like cupcakes are amazing.
And I couldn't quite grasp, like, there seemed to be like something under the surface of like why he didn't eat them I think it was maybe like a control thing, or because later on he goes from eating no cupcakes to eating like 4 in a row.
Yes.
But then I kind of don't touch on that again after that. You're like, did he have a problem with sugar, or like it's fine? Um, but
Oh gosh. Okay,
yeah.
so sweet like a
I
cupcake,
did
and I
feel
will. Yeah.
yeah, very sweet. I really liked her. I thought Leanna was lovely. I think she was like realistically like a bit neurotic about like a new relationship, but in a way that felt very real to me. Where you're like, oh babe, it's all right, don't worry, chill out. But everyone's been there where they're like, oh my god, what did this thing mean? And like, he said this, did he really mean that? And like all of that kind of stuff. And like going to her friends, being like, am I being like wild about this? So I did
Yeah.
like that. And I like the friendship between the three of the girls who work, women I should say, at Meet Me at the Altar. Like I did like that. And they were also like really into food. Like she was like, why have you not bought me bagels? Like what have you bought me for lunch? Like the other girls was like, where's all the food? So I appreciated that, because that's also how I feel when I'm working at the office.
Right? Like, where's my bagel? Where's my cupcake? No,
Yeah.
I'm with you. In fact, I wish I had more of them in the book. Like, I would have loved to have seen more of the dynamic between the three ladies. And I'm excited to read Josie's book because I feel like she's the most mysterious to me. Like, I don't, and
Yeah.
that's how it usually goes, isn't it? It's like you save the best for last, where it's just like, this is the one that everybody wants to read their book because they want to know like what's up with them, what's their secret, like what's their hang up. And so Josie's the one that I am really interested in seeing what her story is and like who she ends up with. I'm with you. Here's my thing with Leanna. There were parts of me that really liked Leanna and I found her very relatable. I love that she's such like a boss at work. There were parts of me that very much disliked Leanna.
Okay. Yeah.
and I think I don't think it's that she was painted as being like, you know, I think I'm just really tired of reading about the insecure woman. That she's so insecure about what she looks like, how much money she makes, the cars she drives, her job. It just bothers me. Like it just, and I know that that's something that so many people experience. Like everybody, not even just women. This is
Yeah.
something everybody experiences at some point in some facet of their life. But it was just everything. It was that she was just so insecure about everything, every part of her life. And I don't know. It just got to the point where I was like, oh my God, we've done this. We've got like, shouldn't we be growing out of this? And I think it got better near the end. I think it got better like the farther we got into the story. But even then, when they have like their misunderstanding, third act breakup moment, I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, again, this is you playing into these insecurities without having a conversation with this man. So that really did bother me. There were several times where I had to set the book down just to be like, oh my God, you're killing me, Leanna.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, especially because it was in such contrast to the fact that she's running this like, amazing business with her friends, like smashing
Yes.
it. Like, oh wait, you've ordered another 500 cupcakes on the date. Don't worry about it. We'll get it done. Like, that part of her life, she was so like, you know, together about, but then everything
Yeah.
surrounded that, like it didn't bleed out to be like, you know what, I am a boss bitch. What are you going to do about it?
And I think part of it was that there were kind of like you mentioned with what's his face, with Brody not really knowing like what his like deal is with sugar. Like why is he so opposed to sugar? Like did something happen? Like I think there were a lot of like background questions that weren't necessarily like answered. Like Leanna is very, she talks about like, oh, my parents are going to be bugging me at this wedding because I don't have a date. And it's like, we never really hear anything about like if she's had lots of failed relationships or like if her parents are just always, pushing for her. We know that I think it's her older sister is married and has a couple kids. And so like, there's like that pressure, but, yeah, I don't know. And then like her parents don't really believe in like her business. But then until, he's defending her at the wedding, being like, no, she's one of the most sought after people for weddings like in the state. And they're like, oh, that's amazing. It's like, well, why are you just realizing this now? It just
Yeah.
there were things that I was like, is she going to have it out with her parents? Like, is there going to be a discussion about her self-worth? And Brody gets to that point. We see him have, you know,
Yeah.
the all-out battle with like his dad and like laying it down and everything. But I don't think Leanna ever got that moment. And so I feel like she didn't get the closure that I wanted her to have.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, definitely felt like, oh, he loves me now, so therefore it's all tied up and don't worry about it. Yeah,
Yes.
parents never come back into it at all, do they?
No, no. In fact, the last time we see them is at the wedding where he like defends her and tells them how great she is. And that's it. We never see them again.
Yeah. See, my other question was on his side, and it kind of came together at the end with like, because the dad was so awful and
Yes.
manipulative. But like, there's this whole question throughout the whole way, like, oh, Brody's always so disruptive. He's always like causing arguments. He's always doing this, and didn't really see. The only time was he just said, I don't think this should be a 4-day engagement party, which was rude. Don't get me wrong. It's already happening. Like, I don't know why you're kicking off about it, but they just kind of made this whole big deal out of like how he was a disruptive child. I was like, was this just like the way his dad had portrayed him and he actually wasn't, or was he really actually awful? Because at one point he says like, oh, if you weren't here, like I probably would have had arguments with like 3 people and like being kicked out, and you're like, mate, look at your behavior. Like, either this is true and you're awful, or it's not. And why does everyone think it is? I couldn't quite put my finger on what that was.
Yeah, I'm with it. The dad to me was terrible. Like,
Yeah,
oh my God, what an awful human. And then for him to like come around and like apologize and stuff in the end, I was just like, I don't know if I believe this. This seems like a trick. Like, you know, it only took him, you know, I mean, it's weird to say it only took him having a heart attack for him to like make a change, but I was like, he just seemed so severe in his treatment of, you know, his family, his children. Like, I mean, the fact that Brody brings up that like their dad has been pitting them against each other for like 30 years, like for their entire lives. I'm like, okay, so he's been doing this for 30 years. He has his way of thinking that's clearly not going to change. And then all it takes is a heart attack for him to like reverse on all of that.
Yeah, and I did kind of feel like maybe the implication was also that Leanna was so nice and so sweet that she also like showed them all in like a manic pixie dream girl kind of a way.
Yes.
There's another way to be. You can be nice and still have a business, and you can do all these things. So
I am also not a fan of the manic pixie dream girl.
Yeah, there was that, and I kind of feel like there was also a bit of like a not like other girl, like her
Yes.
and her cousin, like Charlene. Charlene was the evil one because she wanted a 4-day engagement party and with like a million cupcakes, and she wanted to go on the private jet. But Leanna only just wanted to go away to the coast. Like, she didn't ask to go on the jet. I'm like, if it was me and I knew my boyfriend had a private jet, I wouldn't be chill about that. I am like the other girls. I want the fancy holiday. How rich are they? They must be like very wealthy.
Yeah, for real. I mean, because I feel like it's got to be like, they don't blatantly say that it's like a billionaire romance, but I feel like his family is worth billions.
They must be, because they've got golf carts all over the place to get people from the door to the party. Like, they have a private jet. They paid for this 4-day, and then everyone acts like Charlene was being really unreasonable for wanting this.
I mean, a 4-day engagement, but like, let me just make it clear to everyone. This is not a 4-day wedding affair. Like, I've been to weddings where it's like, you know, multiple days leading up to the wedding, you know, this is a 4-day engagement party. Like, and I'm just like, what do you do for 4 days? Like, I just celebrate not even your wedding, but your engagement.
Yeah, which is wild. But like, they just like really like ragged on her because she'd like obviously asked us, and they were like, yeah, and they were all really keen on it.
Yeah,
they were really like supportive about it, and then they turned around and were like, oh, you want to use the private jet? Well, you're clearly a gold digger. How dare you?
Yeah, that was weird. Like, the way that went down, like it seemed fine the whole time, and then finally it came to the point where the dad's just like, son, you need to like rein her in, because like this whole thing was crazy. It's like, oh, so it's okay to talk about this after the fact, but like not leading up to it like Brody did. Brody was literally trying to avert a disaster, and like his family just wants to complain about the disaster that it was. And I'm like, well, that's not good thinking. Like, come on now.
Yeah,
Rich people problems.
well, definitely, it definitely felt like a rich people problems book. Um, but then even like Leanna was supposed to be like not very well off because she had lived in a small apartment and stuff. But then even her like sister had like 2 holiday houses and all this other stuff. So like, I don't feel like she came from like a super like disadvantaged background. She
Yeah.
wasn't doing too badly for herself generally, but I guess compared to
Yeah.
a billionaire, she was, you know.
But she didn't want to park her crappy car in his driveway. Oh. Yeah, the self-conscious stuff like really and it's something. It's funny, Amy and I were talking about this before we started recording, but one of the things that really struck me was as I was reading, it took me a while to remember that this was a book that came out just this past month. And because I think that there's a lot of things, and earlier we mentioned all these authors who are like pushing romance forward and like, oh, we're being more inclusive and we're writing diverse heroines and we're giving them, stronger stories. And I feel like this was one where there's nothing wrong with it, but I just was kind of like, it compared to what I've been reading, I found it lacking in some ways. Like I just sort of like am expecting, I think I have higher expectations for what I'm reading now. And when those expectations aren't met, I'm left feeling a little disappointed. And that's probably selfish. However, if somebody's just looking for like a quick, fun wedding baked goods read, I think you'll be
Yeah.
perfectly satisfied. But for me, I don't think this one kind of like lived up to what I was looking for, at least while I was reading it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there for sure. I think it did feel a little bit like we were talking earlier about, when I was a teenager, I read all these books with, the shoes on the cover, almost Bridget Jonesy, and it's just like, oh, it's a good thing I'm lifting all these cakes. Hopefully, I'll lose some weight. And you're like, are we still
Yeah.
doing that as a thing? And like, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
like, I think everyone probably has those thoughts, or like, we live in a fat phobic society, etc. So on
Right.
and so forth. So like to suggest that no one ever thinks that, but I just kind of feel like I'm kind of over reading it now.
Yeah.
Genuinely. It's not like you say, it's sort of not pushing things forward. It's so the fact that it was published so recently is, I think, if you gave it to someone blind, they would think, oh yeah, it's probably from 10 years ago or so.
Yeah. I
um,
agree. I agree. And you know what? I will say there are a few things that I really did like. I actually really liked Brody's character for the most part. Like I exactly what you said earlier. Like I know everybody kept talking about like, oh, he's so moody and he's so confrontational and he almost messes up these business deals because of his temper. And I'm like, well, that's definitely not the Brody we see in this book. So
yeah,
I really enjoy the guy he is. Like it's almost an insta love story, which also isn't really my jam, but because he's like really into her, like from the get-go, and she's very attracted to him too. I mean, they hook up, at the engagement party weekend, and then I do like that we get to see like the progression of their relationship, because I feel like that's something that we don't necessarily get to see a lot of in romance. Usually
yeah,
romance is more about the pursuit and like eventually it ends with them becoming a couple, but this one, a lot of it takes place where they have become a couple, and it's like, okay, this is me inviting her to spend the weekend with me for the first time. And this is, me inviting her to, I mean, really, it's him making all the steps.
yeah.
But it's,
Yeah, he's so keen. Like he like you say, he's really into her straight away, and
yes.
I guess that makes the insecurity seem a little bit more. I know, obviously, we're seeing it from his perspective, so she doesn't know this, but like all of his actual actions towards her suggest that he's very into her. Like, and then she's
Hmm.
going, "Oh, I don't know. Is he actually, just using me this whole time to like get a promotion?" I think is the
Yeah.
like the fear, like, oh, he's only doing this to impress his dad so he gets a promotion. Yeah, but what about everything he's said and done in the last like massive
Right.
this book suggests that to you? Because if sometimes I think when you have that, you're like, oh well, because they haven't been together so long, you're like, okay, you could maybe see where that misunderstanding comes from. But if she wasn't so insecure, she'd just been like, yeah, no, that's not the case. Thanks, Charlene. I'm
Yeah.
right.
Charlene.
I
Yeah,
know
no,
that was the only bit where I did feel, generally I'm all about justice for Charlene, but she was quite rude to her at the family dinner. So she
she's
felt,
just jealous. Charlene's jealous. Like, yeah, and And that's the thing is, you're absolutely right, because I'm like, he never really gives her any reason to doubt his affection. Like, I mean, he's always the one pushing the relationship forward and wanting more. And the only time we see that kind of switch is that she's the first one to say, I love you, and he doesn't say
Yeah.
it back right away, which honestly, I actually kind of liked, because I feel like that's a very real
Yeah.
situation. And I love the awkward messy in romance. That's my favorite thing, is like awkward hot mess. But he even realizes right away, he's like, oh shoot, I messed this up. I have to go after her. I have to tell her I love her and, make sure that she's okay. And I was like, yes, yes, Brody, you get
Yeah.
it, son. And so, yeah, I was a fan of his, like, start to finish. Like, I really do think, yeah, I think for as much as her insecurities bothered me, I really did like the character growth that he had, both as an individual and also, like, with Leanna.
My only thing I will say about him that I was like, I can't get on board with this, was when she was like, oh, let's get Mexican takeaway. And he's like, Mexican? You mean you eat it with your hands? I'm like, what is this, 2021? You haven't had a fajita before, man. You're a billionaire. What?
Okay, yeah. So there were actually, I marked this in my Kindle because there were a few parts where I was just like, wait a second. Like, it was more of like for a believability factor, and one of them was the Mexican food where he's like, I guess the way he explained it, it didn't really bother me as much, because he's like, "Oh, my family, like the way we were raised, like we didn't eat with our hands." And I'm like, "Okay, well
Yeah.
that is weird, but I guess I can forgive that, but also you're a grown-ass man, like you haven't gotten a burrito." But then one of the other ones, let's see, I have a couple. One was, when he told her, "I didn't realize weddings were a summer thing." And I'm like, dude, where the hell have you been?
Yeah. Have you just not, are you so obnoxious, or does your family think you're so obnoxious you never get invited? Like,
Maybe that's it. He's
yeah.
just never been invited to weddings. And then the other one was where, I think it's when they're at the engagement party. Oh no, it's when he's helping her bake for the engagement festivities, and his mom walks in and, like, they're listening to music, and his mom's like, "Oh, I love this song. Beyonce's the best," or whatever. And
Yes.
he says, "You know who Beyonce is?" And I'm like, she's a human being living in 2021. Of course she knows who Beyonce
And also,
is.
like, she's not like, I mean, maybe if it was like his grandma, but like, he was what, 32? Assuming that his mum wasn't like really old when he's the middle child. So what is she potentially in like mid 50s? Like,
Right.
late 50s, maybe? Like, she's not.
I kind of question if he knows who Beyonce is, because clearly he's a robot.
Yeah, there are a few moments like that. Yeah, it was.
Although I do appreciate that when it does come to him eating cupcakes eventually and he's like chowing down, he does pour himself a glass of milk. And that's something I've talked about extensively on
Yes.
this podcast.
Yeah.
So I did like that he did choose milk with his cake as opposed to water, because that's the correct choice.
No, I mean, I don't really like milk that much, but I know. I probably wouldn't have milk, have just like plain water either, because it just would get all like claggy in your mouth, wouldn't it?
Yeah. What do you drink then when you're eating like a baked good?
I don't know. I've just like, now I'm thinking like, have I done that? I must have done.
See, now you're going to be more conscious of it.
I am. The next time I
you
do
have,
it, I'll come back to you.
yeah, like
Yeah.
especially when it comes to like a brownie, like something thick and chocolatey. I'm like, you can't have water. You cannot have water with that.
No, but I'm trying to think whether I would just eat it without a drink at all, and then keep those two parts completely separate. Depends how big the brownie is, I suppose.
Yes, that's true. Oh, you know what? One other thing that I did really like, and this is going to sound so silly, but like I love reading the author's notes and acknowledgments in a book. And I really like that in the beginning of this book, Samantha Chase says thank you to the amazing bakers at Wren House Bakery in
Yes.
Knoxville, Tennessee. I thought that was so precious that she wrote them like a personal note about how she drives like 6 hours out of her way to go to this bakery, and they, gave her treats that inspired her to write the book and
Yeah.
answered her questions. I thought that was so sweet. So, just a reminder to everybody to shop local and support those local businesses.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like you don't get as many like bakeries in the UK in the same way that I feel like you do in the States. There is like one in our town that does like cupcakes and brownies and things like that, but
Yeah.
generally speaking, not so much.
I'm a donut fan myself.
Mm,
I love me a good donut, and I feel like either a city has a bunch of donut places or they have like none.
yeah,
So that's a tough one. That's a tough one for me.
yeah. We do actually. Donuts are like in vogue. I live in Leeds, which is again
Really?
we got a lot of in the like last like year and a half. I feel like a lot of donut places have popped up. So you can
I
come and visit
love
me and
that.
we can do a little donut tour.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I would love that. That's fantastic. Well, okay. Anything else to say before we move on to talking about I would say the sexcerps of this book, but it's more of just like some foreplay
Yeah.
zerps, because we don't actually have sex on the page.
No, I don't think I've got anything else. Like you say, it's definitely you get like a little bit at the beginning, and then it's fade to black, and then it's the next morning kind of thing.
And you know what? They have sex a lot in this book. Like they
Happens a
do.
lot in this book.
We just don't get to read about it.
Yeah. Well, I say every room of the house when she comes for the weekend, and like, yeah, they do talk about they've had lots of sex, but yeah, you don't get to see it. Which I mean, each their own in terms of what you do and don't like, but I like to see it on the page.
You and me both. But I will say, as little, sex on the page that we, had, which was, zero. There were a lot of moments that I did think were very cute, were potentially sexy if like they had led to something else. Like one of the ones I liked was where he comes home and she's like wearing like a French maid outfit.
Yeah,
And he actually says one of my favorite lines in the book, which is she asks him about like, oh, like what is there a different like fantasy that you'd like to play out, like, and he says, well, sexy baker, obviously. And she's like, no, that's boring. And he said, sweetheart, if you stood in the kitchen wearing anything at all, you're a sexy baker. And I
yeah,
was like,
so
oh my
nice.
gosh, my heart melted at that line.
Yeah, yeah, he's like so super into her, like very complimentary to her all the time. It's nice. My favorite, I think, was when she gets to his house. He invites her to the house for the weekend. It's a big deal because they've only ever stayed at her place. He's very private about his house. Partly for this kind of like not other girls thing, like they just want him for his money. I
Yeah.
kind of got the impression of, because he has a really, really nice house. They talk at one point about how many square feet it is and how he's had all these like renovations done and stuff. But she comes over and then he's bought her like all the baking
Yep.
equipment that you could possibly want, which in itself is quite sexy if you're
Yes.
interested. But then, like, they either have sex on the kitchen counter or they start off in the kitchen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's on
It's
the
like
it's on the island, I
on
think,
the
the
like
first
fancy
time.
island, yeah. So I thought that felt like, given the theme of the book, like the most like baking related.
I
Little sex
agree.
scene as well, which I
And
liked.
that's something that annoys me when I read like a foodie romance where it's like in the kitchen or in the bakery and I'm like, y'all better have sex in this bakery too. Or like if same with like an office romance, like if 90% of the book takes place in an office, if somebody's not getting banged across the desk, like I'm going to be very upset.
It's the promise of the premise, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. You're telling me what I'm getting and then I'm not getting it. Even though, and the thing is, it's one of those things where you like absolutely have to like suspend your like disbelief, because it's very unhygienic for like obviously it's his kitchen, so it's not quite so bad. It's not in her like professional kitchen. But I have read books where they've had sex in like, the kitchens of restaurants, and you just have to be like, this is fine. I'm going to assume it was completely disinfected afterwards. Don't worry about
Yes.
it. Same with the office. I mean, like, offices are a bit grim anyway, but like, let's pretend this is like the nicest office, and that there's definitely no risk that the cleaners are going to walk in unless that's part of it.
Yes, that has
Yeah,
to be specified, like, unless they want that to happen. But,
yeah,
yeah, I actually in fact, that scene that you mentioned where he does gift her with, like, the top of the line, like, kitchen products,
yeah,
that was the one scene I highlighted as, like, not it's like my stand-in sexcerpt. Again, it's not, them having sex, it's just kind of leading up to it, but just to
yeah.
give everybody a little taste of what you can expect, let's see, I'll start here. A slow smile crossed her face. Baking isn't the only playing I want to do in the kitchen. I will say it did some of the the wordplay did get a little cheesy for me, but
Yeah, especially when you have to read it out loud, it becomes,
yeah.
yeah,
Like just some of the things they would say to each other, I'm like, okay, this is like a little much for me, but also I feel like it fits them, so it's okay.
yeah.
Um, Leanna leaned in and ran her tongue along his bottom lip, and he moaned softly. One of her hands raked through his hair. This island feels very sturdy, she whispered against his lips. It is, he told her, his voice gruff. That was me trying to do a gruff voice.
I
Um,
mean, also she's there, she's complimenting his renovations as well, so it works for both of them.
Absolutely. Have I mentioned that I have a fantasy about having a dark-haired man take me in the middle of a kitchen just like this one? He was hard instantly. That's a fun trick. A fantasy, you say? He hummed and nipped at her jaw. What exactly happens during this fantasy? Does this dark haired man just claim you? Or does he take his time and do things like this? Slowly, Brody licked his way from her collarbone to the shell of her ear. His hands were braced on the marble on either side of her, but now he placed them on her denim clad thighs and inched his way up. Does he touch you? Tease you, tell you how incredibly sexy you are. And like, see, again, here's the thing is I feel like I've read Samantha Chase before, and I'm having a hard time figuring out what book it was, but I swear I know the name. I know I've read her before. And I'm wondering if in her other books it's also like a fade to black situation when it comes to
Yeah,
the sex, because all of the foreplay in this is really hot. Like, I mean, there's a lot of it. There's they allude to like her going down on him. There's a
yeah,
lot of like him playing with her nipples in multiple times. And I'm just like, I'm just so curious what was the reasoning between including all of the sexy foreplay and then not following through with like the sex on
yeah,
the page.
yeah.
I just don't get it.
Yeah, because it's not completely fade to black. It is like say like that bit, and it obviously goes on, is like relatively explicit,
Right.
and then it just sort of ends, and it's kind of like, and then it's the next morning or whatever, it is, and she bakes 100 cupcakes in his kitchen, and
Ugh.
then yeah, and so yeah, like it's kind of halfway between fade to black and then like full sex on page,
Yeah,
which
which is
could
going
come
to
across
make it
bad.
that's going to make it really hard for me to give it like a heat rating, because
Yeah,
my general rule, and I feel like I'm going to have to become a little more specific with my heat scale, not for myself necessarily, but just for readers to make sure that they know what they're going into. But um I usually grade on a scale of 1 to 10, and my general rule of thumb is that a 5 is what I give a book as long as there's sex on the page. And for this one, I'm like, okay, well, we don't have sex on the page. However, there's these descriptive foreplay scenes that are more in depth than some books where you do get sex on the page. And so I'm so torn when it comes to the heat
yeah,
rating.
yeah, I agree.
I don't know. Did you have a specific scene or moment that you wanted to share, or have we covered our bases?
That was the one that I highlighted as well, because I felt like it was the one that sort of stood out to me,
Oh,
um,
okay.
as well. So I feel like that's a good example of like the books.
I will say one of the things I appreciated was that I didn't realize it until I was reading all of our books for Yummy Love in May, that I am not interested in sex scenes where they compare like body parts to like food.
Yeah,
Literally was something that never crossed my mind until I was reading one of the books where it's like he kneaded her ass and he
no,
molded her breasts as if they were dough. And I'm just like,
no,
nope,
No one wants,
this does not work for me.
no one wants to be dough. That's not, no.
Yeah, and as much as I love food, and you know
Yeah,
what? I'm not opposed to food in the bedroom either, but I'm just like, but that's not me. I'm not the dough.
no. No, I agree. I'm with you. Like, that's not sexy.
The things you learn about yourself while reading a
Well,
romance.
yeah, 100%. And it's weird because everything like foodie romance, and it's like I want them to have sex in the in the kitchen or in
Yeah.
in the and I'm happy for there to be food, but don't compare me to the food. Yeah, like it's complicated. People are complicated.
Yes, I agree. Well, and also, like, don't put food inside anybody. Like,
Oh god, no, yeah,
that's a
no,
hard pass. There was actually a book that we reviewed. It was one of our first episodes, of the podcast, and it was a motorcycle romance where they're sitting down to, like, breakfast, and he's, like, slipping a blueberry inside her pussy, and I'm just
no,
like, "What?"
no, thank you. I don't want that. No.
Yep, that's a no for me as
Yeah, that's a
well.
hard limit. That's 100% a hard limit for me. Especially a blueberry. Like, what a weird, like, an unsexy fruit. Like, I don't
Yeah,
know.
exactly. To quote my guest for the episode, Tiffany, I think she said something along the lines of, "I was into it and still until he started putting blueberries in her puss."
Yeah,
So, yeah, that's a no. As much as I love food in romance, it has
yeah,
a time and a place.
yeah. There are
But
limits.
anyway, all right. Well, let me ask you. Let's go ahead and do our ratings for the book. And
Sure.
we are going to be rating for heart, humor, and heat on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the very best that it could possibly be. So I'm going to save heat for last because it's the one I need to think about the most.
Yeah.
And let's start with heart. What do you think?
See, I thought somewhere around a 6 or a 7 for me. Like, it was very sweet. But I think because there were just like you said, there's some of those unanswered questions. I wasn't like
Mm,
100% invested in them as a couple. I think also because they got together quite quickly. Um,
yeah.
I think for me, it was around the sort of 6 to 7 mark.
I'm with you. I gave it a 6 as well, for very similar reasons. I feel like if it was, like, him alone, like, I would give him, like, a 8 or a 9 for, like, his heart because he's so into her, and he has some sort of resolution with his family. Like,
Yeah,
it's something. I feel like that was missing for her. Like, she had fantastic relationships with her work colleagues and friends and, eventually with Brody, but not so much with her family. And then there was still so much self-doubt that I feel like got in the way of their relationship sometimes. So,
yeah.
um
And like, he really had a growth arc. Like, he started out like this, like good
yeah.
businessman, and then over the course of the book, realized he actually didn't want like the fancy promotion, and he didn't want, to train. He was only doing that because his dad had like manipulated him, and that wasn't what was making him happy. Whereas she felt like she ended the book in a similar place, but she's
Right.
a boyfriend now. Like,
Yeah, exactly. That fixed
she hadn't really
everything.
changed. Yeah, she hadn't really changed, or like kind of. Oh, sorry, this is my
It's all
phone.
good.
Yeah, so yeah, I felt like she, because I think she was already so like, because they painted her as like being already so sweet and so like great. There was nowhere really to take her on that
Yeah.
kind of. She could, but like you say, with her family, there would have been an opportunity there to maybe like not quite tell them off, but for her to be the one rather than getting him to defend her, to be like, actually, parents, I am great and my business is doing really well, and you should appreciate
Mhm.
that. No, then I can't help you. Like,
Exactly. Exactly. So,
yeah.
okay. Well, then how about humor? What do we think? Haha.
See, I didn't find this book very funny at all. I put
I didn't
2.
either.
They had a couple of like situational moments that were quite funny, but overall, I don't know that it was supposed to be funny.
I don't know if it was either. And it's one of those ones where it's like I feel like it could have been like if the author wanted that. Like I think just the whole setup of having a 4-day engagement party
Yeah,
where this woman has to bake, we're talking about hundreds of cupcakes for each day of the events. Like I'm like there is the potential for things to be very hilarious. Like the book could have taken place entirely at this ridiculous weekend if you wanted it to. But that's a different story. That's not the story she was telling. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I'm with you. I don't know if it was meant to be hilarious. And I'm going to assume it wasn't, just to,
Yeah,
hopefully it
great.
wasn't.
Yeah, because
So I'm with you. I'm going to go low. I guess I'll give it like a 3 in terms of humor. Not that it's sad, not that it's angsty. It's just not a laugh out loud rom-com, and there's nothing wrong with that.
yeah, it's a romance rather than a rom-com, isn't it? Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, for sure. And then, okay, here's the tough one. How about the heat?
I've put 4 for it
Okay.
because the bits that were on the page were quite sexy, but I felt like because they cut off, it wasn't like that satisfying.
Yeah.
And that only happened a couple of times. Like she spoke a lot more about them having sex than you ever really saw that happening. So what was there was good, but just not enough of it.
Yeah, no, God, I am still so torn on this because I will say there are some books. I feel like lately I've been cursed by reading a lot of books that end up not having like the sexiest of scenes. And you know what? Some people want that. That's perfectly fine. I understand that, everybody has a different taste in heat, but I want it hot. And so this one's tough for me because there have been books that we have read for the podcast in recent episodes too, where they do have sex, but it feels very tame and glossed over and just sort of like the mechanics of like he put this
Yeah.
in the this. And this one doesn't have that, but the foreplay scenes were steamy-ish and there were a lot of them. So I'm like, you know what? I think I'm going to give it a 5. I think I'm going to give it a 5, which is again where I typically start with on the page sex, and this does not have that. However, it does have, I think, enough. No, I'm going to give it a 4. I lied. It doesn't have it. If I'm going by my rating scale, which is 5 means on the page sex, that it doesn't have it. So there's no explaining it any other way. That's what it's going to be.
I think that's a diplomatic answer. I think that is. I think if someone was someone came to like, oh, I'm looking for a book that's like steamy, you wouldn't go for this one. So
no,
or like sex on page, you just wouldn't give them this one, would you? So,
yeah, this wouldn't be the book that I would recommend for steam factor for sure. Like this is what I would call like a palate cleanser. This would be like you just finished reading a super heavy, angsty mafia romance and you're like, wow, I need to get the death and murder and, trading human beings out of my head and read something light and cute and sweet like a cupcake. And that's this book.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. It's a good palate cleanser for something like that.
I love it. Well, now that we've cleansed our palates with, this book, what's up next for you? Do you have any books that you're excited to move on to this summer or, any specific like upcoming releases that you're excited for?
I'm really excited about One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston.
Yes, ma'am.
Reading it. Yeah. So I've got because I'm jammy and you may be jammy as well. I have an arc of it, like a e-copy of it, but I haven't had time to get to it yet, and it's basically being released like in a week, so I probably won't get to it until it's actually published anyway. But yeah, I'm excited about that one because obviously Red, White and Royal Blue was like the book, and even now is like one of the standouts sort of the genre. So, and it sounds so interesting as well, like really unusual and different. So
what did you say we were? We're jammy?
Jammy, yeah. Like you're being like, well, in the kind of British phrase would be you're a bit of a jammy bugger because you've got something or you're like very lucky in some way.
Oh my God. I love that you said, you were like, well, I'm jammy and you're probably jammy. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to need her to explain what jammy means. It's so funny. I watch so many British shows and I feel like I'm really up to date on the lingo, but you just taught me a new word.
It's probably a bit of like an old-fashioned one, to be honest.
I love it. Okay, so
maybe something my grandparents might have said.
Jammy is like lucky, like you're
when you're okay. a bit smug, but not like in a mean way.
Word of the day, folks. Jammy.
And it's fruity as well, so I feel like it works for this.
I love that. And you're right, I am jammy. I got an ARC. Actually, I got an audiobook, an early
Ooh,
audiobook copy of One Last Stop.
nice.
And I am not an audiobook person by nature. Like, I just don't have the patience. This is something I
I have
recognize about myself.
I'm the same. I'm the same. It was like, oh, it's going to take me 12 hours. No, no,
Yes.
I can't. I
And
could
it's
read it
a
much faster than that.
Thank you. Okay, that is literally the same thought I have about audiobooks is, it's not about the voices, it's about the fact that you and we like to be busy and we only have
Mm,
so much time to devote to sitting down and reading a book cover to cover. And I can read a book in a few hours. An audiobook, let alone the audiobook for One Last Stop, which is a million hours
is it?
long.
Oh gosh.
Um,
Yeah, it's quite a chunky book, isn't it? Like,
it's very good though. I will say I've been listening to like a little bit each day and I really am enjoying it. And so I don't know, it's probably a combination of Casey McQuiston's writing, which is delightful, and the narrator. And I'm really enjoying it. I'm so excited. Well, by the time this episode comes out, it'll be
yeah,
out.
definitely.
So
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, 'cause it's first of June.
yeah.
That it comes out. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I'm excited about that one. That's like my next one to read. But I feel like there's going to be so many books. And the other one, which is also baking related, but is out in the States, but not here in paperback. Yeah, is Rosalind Palmer Takes the Cake by Alexis Hall as
I
well.
knew that's what you were going to say the moment you said a baking book.
Yeah, so it's like Bake Off themed. Obviously, I just love Alexis Hall writing generally, so I'm hyped for that one. And that one's, I think it's out in August here. So um,
Nice. Nice. Well, and there's another one coming out later in I think it's August called is it is it Battle Royale?
is it Lucy Parker?
Yes.
Yes. The cover is really nice. Is it a Lenny Kaufman one? It looks like it.
Yeah, probably because her
Yeah.
work is beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
Battle Royale, it comes out at least here it comes out in August. I actually just got an arc of that one. And
Mhm.
I try to read the arcs that are coming out sooner, like so
Yeah.
I can talk about them, but oh, I'm doing everything in my power not to open this one up immediately and dive into it, especially just coming off of reading a whole month of foodie romance and then talking about this book which is all about baked goods. Like I
Mhm.
want all the cupcakes in my life.
Yeah, definitely. No, that sounds really good as well. It's September here, so we always have to wait like a couple of weeks extra.
Oh, I'm
It's very
sorry.
frustrating. It's very frustrating.
I know, I know. Well, good thing that we're both jammy.
We are. That's true. That's true.
I'm telling you, that's going to be the word that I incorporate into my lingo now. So thank you for that. And Amy, thank you for, joining me today to talk about this book and talk about Words and Kisses and just the wonderful world of romance. It's been shall I say, treat.
Ah. No, honestly, thank you so much. I'm incredibly. I love your show, so I'm very excited to have been on it.
Oh, thank you so much. And, I hope you get a chance to enjoy a cupcake sometime soon. And please, please let me know what you're drinking with your baked goods because now you've got me all kinds of curious. Thanks so much for listening. Boobies and Noobies is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. You can follow Boobies and Noobies on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Boobies Podcast.